Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. As the Israel-Hamas war enters its 7th week, we ask, how does the West view this developing situation? And equally importantly, how does the Western perspective differ from that which we in India are more familiar with? Joining me from London is someone who served for 15 years as editor of one of the world's most highly respected papers, the former editor-in-chief of the Financial Times, Lionel Barber. Mr. Barber, as I said, the Israel-Hamas war has now entered its 7th week. So let me start by asking, what in your opinion do you believe Israel has achieved during this time?
It has killed a number of we don't know how many. I don't think so far, because I'm sure it would have broadcast it, it's come anywhere near to its goal of, and this is what it said, eradicating Hamas. I mean, that means killing every commander, removing them off the map of this small strip called Gaza. It has not released the hostage, managed to secure the release of the hostages, and it's obviously polarized the world. We're talking about my own country in Britain, you have pro-Palestinian marches, more than 300,000 in the streets the other weekend. And then you obviously have people who have great sympathy for Israel and are appalled what happened on October the 7th. But I would say, Karen, so far, in terms of eradicating the Hamas and securing the release of the hostages, or giving any clues about what the future of Gaza Strip will be, it has not yet achieved its objective.
In fact, would you go a shade stronger? If, as you said, it's killed a large number of people, but we don't know the exact number, but it's several thousand to be sure. It hasn't come anywhere near its goal of eradicating Hamas and has polarized the world. Has it achieved anything of any great purpose in these 7 weeks?
Oh, yes. I think it is important to, we should definitely make clear that the number of civilians killed as a result of the Israeli military operation, I mean, it may run to 12,000. That's what the Gaza health authorities are saying. Certainly, maybe 10,000 more, and a lot of women and children. So that's clear. And the very latest videos reveal this, that Hamas was deeply embedded in Gaza. They're a terrorist organization dedicated to eradicating Israel, and they were responsible for an absolute atrocity on October the 7th. So I think in those terms, Karen, you cannot say that the Israeli operation, which is still incomplete, has been a complete failure.
What about the ideology of Hamas as opposed to the organization? Could that perversely have been strengthened by what's been happening in Gaza, both within Gaza, but possibly also in the West Bank?
Well, again, it depends on where you're sitting. I mean, if you're in Turkey or Qatar, where, by the way, a lot of the Hamas leadership hang out, or in Russia or in China, you will think that Hamas is something certainly not to be condemned and to be sympathized with. If you're in amongst Israeli friends, if you're in America, then there'll be a different perspective. And that Hamas truly, I mean, what they did on October the 7th, whatever the treatment of Palestinians, and I'm sure we'll come to that, by the current Israeli government, and the absence of a political solution on the West Bank and Gaza, all that aside, Hamas is a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. And we cannot hide that. And nothing they have done so far has that. They have deliberately tried to provoke Israel in order to discredit Israel in the public eye. That has been their goal. They don't care about the way civilians in Gaza have died. They're hiding in and amongst civilians. So we can't deny that. We can't look aside from that.
Let me tell you why I asked that question. Foreign Affairs magazine, roughly 2.5 weeks ago, carried a poll by Arab Barometer. And the interesting thing is that the research for that poll only concluded on the 6th of October. And as you know, the Hamas strike happened the next day on the 7th. And that poll, which I presume is the most recent possible poll, shows that distrust for Hamas in Gaza was very high. 44% said they had no trust at all. 23% said they did not have a lot of trust. That's a total of 67%. So clearly, before October 7th, dissatisfaction with Hamas was growing in Gaza. Now, could that have been reversed by the Israeli bombing and the fact that something like 12,300 or 13,000 civilians and others have been killed, 29,000 injured, and vast swathes of Gaza reduced to rubble? Could they have reversed something that they would regret doing?
Karen, you make a very important point that some of the actions and the way, although the Israeli military is insisting that it is not conducting indiscriminate violence, the fact that civilians have died, and therefore you could well be breeding the next generation of extremists, if not affiliated to Hamas. You could be breeding another generation of terrorists. So that is a serious problem for the Israelis. And remember, they have still to say in any detail what they think the future of Gaza will be, because they don't want to have a permanent occupation there.
Is there a danger that not only are they breathing to life another generation dedicated to terrible revenge in Gaza, but they may also be sowing similar seeds in the West Bank, where the Palestine Authority and the PLO are anyway very discredited? Is it not possible that in the eyes of the West Bank, Hamas now may look like a better representative of the Palestinian cause?
I'm not sure about Hamas. I don't want to be doing polling for Hamas or recruiting, certainly not. But Karen, you make a very important point about what's happening in the West Bank. So far, the UN has documented 222 incidents of violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank. That's about 7 per day. There are plenty of arms going there into the West Bank. And remember, too, that one of the reasons the Israelis were caught by surprise on the attack on October the 7th is they'd actually is in West Bank to support Israeli settlers, often taking seizing illegal territory. So this is a problem for the Israeli government. Well, for the Israeli government led by Mr. Netanyahu.
Let me at this point, Mr. Barber, raise with you two controversies that have arisen, and I'll only raise them in terms in which either the BBC or Israeli papers themselves have presented it. The first is to do with Israel's claim that Hamas had located its command center under the Al-Shifa Hospital, which the Israeli army has separately described as the beating heart. BBC journalists, and more importantly, the BBC's well-known Verify investigation team, claims that all Israel has revealed is a handful of guns, 2 army grab bags, and a laptop, the content of which we have no idea what it is. The BBC Verify team has also pointed out inconsistencies and contradictions in the Israeli army video. So as you view this, do you think Israel has established its critical claim that the Hamas had organized a command center under the Al-Shifa Hospital, or do you share some of the doubts the BBC has made public?
I think there's no doubt that Hamas fighters were located in that hospital and underneath that hospital. You referred to a video. If you look at the latest videos, it's on the New York Times website this morning, they show an Israeli video of a tunnel, deep tunnel underneath the hospital, where the Israelis have still to make their case beyond doubt. It was a command center for Hamas. They haven't captured any Hamas commanders. They have to answer the question whether actually the Hamas command has gone to the south. I mean, actually, if you read Israeli sources now, including the military, there's a lot of people saying actually the fight is going to be in the south and the Hamas top commanders are located there. But I don't think there's any doubt that Hamas had embedded itself in and around and under the hospital.
But you don't believe they've established as yet that there was a command center under the hospital?
I don't believe the Israelis have established beyond doubt, and that's an important claim. For whatever reason, I would have thought they would want to make that case very clearly and fairly soon, given the enormous bad publicity, because as we know, there's a narrative here. And both sides are trying to win the propaganda war, but they have not established beyond doubt that there was a command center underneath the hospital.
The second controversy is one that's been revealed by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. It's reported over the weekend that maybe some, perhaps several, of the Israelis killed at the Supernova Music Festival on the 7th of October were actually killed by fire from Israeli military helicopters, not by Hamas. And in a sense, this corroborates what Hamas spokesmen in interviews have claimed with me. When they said it on Saturday, oddly enough, I was questioning of them. But now that Haaretz has, in a sense, corroborated part of the story, I obviously accept what Haaretz says. If Haaretz is correct, and I suppose there is an if there, how embarrassing would this be for Israel?
It would be embarrassing, but I want to make something very clear. There is no doubt, and we cannot forget, that hundreds of Hamas fighters crossed the border into Israel and killed women and children. And there was, to use a biblical phrase, this was the slaughter of the innocents. These were civilians. Some Israeli soldiers, members of the IDF, died, but there were enormous numbers of Jewish families slaughtered by Hamas fighters. This was the biggest loss of life since 1945. You cannot ignore that. So the fact that there may have been some friendly fire, I think, does not diminish from that important point.
Now, let's come to the way some people perceive opinion of governments in the West is shifting, altering. I won't go so far as to say changing completely, but there seems to be a discernible shift. Increasingly, in the last 10 days, Israel's Western allies have begun to criticize the number of civilian deaths in Gaza. That list includes Tony Blinken, Rishi Sunak, Justin Trudeau. The French president and the Spanish prime minister have gone a step further. They've actually called for a ceasefire. How much pressure is this likely to put on the Netanyahu government?
a degree of pressure. What is striking, Karen, is the degree to which the Netanyahu government has essentially thumbed its nose at everybody, including the Americans. When you think that Joe Biden, President Biden, went to Israel, embraced Benjamin Netanyahu in his moment of crisis. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Netanyahu is talking about a permanent presence in Gaza. He's done nothing to talk about what potential political solutions there may be. He's the war president. He's not going anywhere, and he's not listening to the West. So this has created a lot of problems. And actually, I was just been in America, not in Washington, but in New York, where I talked with some people who are fairly well informed. And there's certainly a degree of resentment in the White House about the way Mr. Netanyahu is conducting his campaign and really not caring what everybody else thinks. Now, that's not to say that Western leaders are embracing a ceasefire. They're certainly talking about a pause, maybe while the hostages are freed. Remember, there are negotiations underway through a third party, Qatar. But in general, people are actually, they're not, Mr. Netanyahu is conducting his campaign and he's not really giving a fig about the state of Western public opinion, the fact that there are thousands in the streets in London. That's not his goal. He wants to conduct his campaign and stay in power.
So you're suggesting that regardless of the way voices in Western governments now criticize the killing of civilians, it will have minimal impact on Netanyahu?
I believe it will. He will judge with his commanders when and if he wants to pause this campaign. The fact at the moment, they are talking about going south into the Gaza Strip to kill the rest of the Hamas command. This is a much more difficult military operation. You'll have a couple of million Gazans essentially being pushed into an area the size of Los Angeles airport. There'll be much more misery and suffering. It's going to be really difficult. Difficult for leaders who still are clinging to a line where they are not calling for a ceasefire in this conflict.
Now, the Israeli foreign minister, very possibly in the connection that you're talking about, Eli Cohen, has said that Israel can only carry on the war for another 2-3 weeks. He believes that after that, the pressure from the West will be something Israel cannot resist. Does he have that much time, in your opinion? 2-3 more weeks to do in the area around Khan Yunis what they've so effectively done in the north?
Well, I'd always been of the view that there was a window for the Israelis to conduct this military operation. And weeks. What I've seen since is I think that that clearly wasn't long enough. But remember, they've been pretty careful the way they've been attacking the tunnels in the search for Hamas fighters in order to reduce the number of casualties. I now think, yes, I think they could, and they certainly seem to want 2 to 3 weeks. There may be the variable is obviously if some hostages are released. Maybe they're talking about 50 hostages. Excuse me, Karen. You may then have a pause, but then there will be a resumption of hostilities. But overall, I think this will carry on for a number of weeks because it's clear, and this is where we started from, the Israeli military hasn't achieved its objective of seriously diminishing or damaging, removing the Hamas command.
Let me then put a thought to you that may not be prevalent in the West, but it certainly is one that's prevalent in my country and in what's called the global South. Is the Israeli military justified in carrying on seeking to eradicate Hamas, no matter what the cost in civilian Palestinian life?
It's obviously very difficult to mount a serious defense when you see the level of suffering on the ground in Gaza and the number of civilian casualties. I should make clear that the Israeli military says it is not conducting indiscriminate violence, and it's also made the case sacrosanct if you've got terrorists embedded or fighters embedded underneath the hospital or inside the hospital. So they're using that justification. To my mind, Karen, the constraint on the Israeli government and military is actually the question of the hostages. If they began to be killed and there's no prospect of release, I think public opinion is Israel may then call for a pause and a deal to get their loved ones back.
The hostages is a particularly interesting point that you raised, Mr. Barber. Al Jazeera, quoting Hamas, claims that 60 hostages have so far been killed as a result of Israeli airstrikes, but we have no confirmation of that. And even when I interviewed the former head of the Hamas political bureau, Musa Abu Marzouk, on Saturday, he couldn't confirm it. But what I've noticed is this. In the past, Israel was prepared for hugely disproportionate exchanges of Palestinian prisoners for its soldiers. I think in 2011, it handed back 1,027 Palestinian prisoners for a solitary Israeli soldier. In 1985, they handed back 1,150 Palestinian prisoners for just 3 soldiers. But this time around, with pretty close to 240 hostages in Hamas hands, they are not prepared for a similar sort of deal. How do you read that?
I think that's a reflection of the atrocities on October the 7th. They feel with some justification that there has to be retaliation against Hamas. To see a hostage deal delay a necessary military operation is a different calculation.
Is it simply a reflection of the atrocities, or is there also pressure on Netanyahu from the right wing that is now part of his government, people like Stomrich and Ben-Gvir? One of them, I believe, has even gone public to say we should be prepared to sacrifice the hostages to secure Israel's national interest.
Well, and another talked about using a nuclear bomb in Gaza. So look, Mr. Netanyahu has some very far right-wing bedfellows. An American who's been involved in the peace negotiations for many years said to me that Mr. Netanyahu has made a pact with the devil in terms of the allies that he now has on the far right. So it is correct to say that Netanyahu has to watch his right flank, and that's probably, almost certainly, hardened his position. However, I do believe that this is still driven largely by the scale of atrocities against Israel and the number of people killed, that they feel they need to conduct a military operation as severe and punitive as now.
We're coming to the end of this interview, but I want to talk to you briefly about the future. Blinken, the American Secretary of State, made it crystal clear in so many words in Tokyo just 2 weeks ago that America is in favor of unifying Gaza and the West Bank under the Palestine Authority. There is no question, he said, of pushing Palestinians out of the West Bank or of the Israeli government imposing its control indefinitely. That means America is talking about a two-state solution. But we also know this is something that Netanyahu has considered an anathema for the 16 years he's been prime minister. Do you think that he's now in a position where he will be forced to accept this and start making way for it if he wishes to retain American support?
We're not there yet. I don't see Netanyahu coming to the table. I don't see it because of the constitution of his right-wing cabinet. I think he has to go. But he's running a war now, so he's not going to go. But there's a much bigger question, which you're implicitly addressing, which is the future of the Middle East. and the way in which there are two trends. One is a terrorist trend backed by Iran, dedicated to the destruction or the severe weakening of Israel. There's another trend, which is a modernizing force, where Israel has been able, through the power of its economy, the high-tech economy, the fact that it's a strong state, that countries that have the money, the wealth, and want to look to the future, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, they want to have closer relations with Israel. And that's one of the reasons why this attack took place, because this was an attack against that trend. And the question you have to ask, therefore, is how is this going to play out? Are we going to see the modern parties really care more about their relationship with the Israelis than, say, the future fate of the Palestinians? Or can we have both? And I'd like to think we could have both, but it needs another leader. That means you can have closer relations with the Arab states, but there needs to be a future for the Palestinians, which must revolve, you just have to look at the demographics, around a two-state solution.
What about the pressure on those Arab states, particularly Egypt, Jordan, and the Abraham Accord states, from their own Arab street? Will they, after what's happened, seeing tens, maybe 12, 13,000 of their Palestinian brothers killed, be willing for a closer relationship forged by their governments, particularly monarchies that may not be so popular, with Israel?
Well, we've heard a lot about the Arab street over the years, and sometimes it barked, so to speak, in 2011. But right now, I think you have a strong man in Egypt. He's actually said, we're not taking all the Palestinian refugees in the Sinai. He's drawn a line. But basically, that relationship between Egypt and Israel, though under strain, remains. I think it's incredibly important what happens in Jordan, because there the king is under pressure. He's already having to deal with a couple of million refugees. He doesn't want any more. And really, he's a friend of the West. He's a moderate Arab leader. We really do need to watch his back. And then you've referred to other states. I think you really, it's for the Israeli people about their leaders. But honestly, we're not going anywhere with Netanyahu still in power on this question.
I'll come to Netanyahu as my last question in a moment's time, but let me ask you one penultimate question before that. How much damage, in your eyes, has been done to Israel's international image, and in particular, as far as the young in the West are concerned, by what even Israelis like Gideon Levy now call a bloodbath in Gaza? How much damage has this done to Israel's standing in Western eyes?
Well, I think it's done a lot of damage because it's obscured what actually happened, or is obscuring what actually happened on October the 7th. The opinion in America, where frankly the academic leadership has been somewhat supine, but there is tremendous sympathy for the Palestinians and, frankly, something not short of apologists for the violent terrorist act and anti-Semitism. But it's polarized communities, it's polarized public opinion in my country. And so there must be at some point some time when the Israelis need to stop the bombing and come to an international diplomatic settlement where you do call on those countries with the money to try and rebuild Gaza. The questions of governance, they try to achieve a semblance of peace in that troubled region.
Very quickly, how do you account for the fact that such a significant, if not dominant, proportion of the young, not just in your country, but in America as well, where the Democrats are in fact a part of this, have actually come down so squarely on the side of the Palestinians?
Well, I hesitate to say this, but they might want to perhaps read their history books and understand how the state of Israel was formed, the role of the colonial powers. They might want to look at what happened to the Jews in Central Eastern Europe, in Nazi Germany, why they came to Israel. They might want to look at why Israel's public opinion has changed because of the immigration from the Soviet Union, where you have a different type of, not necessarily the same type of liberal Jew that came from Western Europe after the war. I mean, there are lots of factors here, which frankly, in this age of instant communication and WhatsApp, you need to look at the nuances of history, and that might help. But overall, it's because they're looking at those pictures, the younger generation. They're seeing the appalling pictures of suffering. They're looking at the numbers of people killed, civilians, in this military operation, and they're saying, my cause is with Palestine. They're only seeing, though, part of a very complicated picture.
So it's the incredible part of the television image.
The power of television, but also the power of Instagram, the power of instant communication, where you're seeing slivers and not the big picture.
My last question, Mr. Barber. Clearly, Netanyahu's end is in sight. Whenever the war ends, he will have to go. What do you think will be history's verdict on his 16 years as prime minister?
Well, it might have been quite generous if he'd gone. And this has happened so many times with leaders when they stay on too long. I mean, he clearly faced corruption charges related to his wife. He tried to go for essentially skewing the judiciary. You had, remember, this is important, hundreds of thousands of Israelis on the streets protesting against Netanyahu. So his legacy has been irrevocably tarnished, and he bears tremendous responsibility for a political and intelligence and military failure on October the 7th. And therefore, there will be a reckoning to come from Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mr. Barber, thank you very much for the time you spared for me. Unfortunately, there were several moments when, in fact, the line was breaking, but I don't think we've actually lost anything that was critical. Whenever it picked up, we got a clear sense of what you were saying. I thank you for having made time for me. Take care.
Thank you, Karan. It's good to be on the show.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.